Hello and welcome to the Smarter Conversations podcast, where we'll be weaving together voices from the cotton supply chain. This podcast is brought to you by the US Cotton Trust Protocol. I'm your host, Kathy Smith. I'm an independent freelance journalist. This podcast series does exactly what the name implies. I'm going to be talking to some of the key movers and shakers in the global textile supply chain to dig into the world of cotton. So we're on episode 9 of our podcast series, and our subject today is biodiversity, and we're focusing on how the protection of biodiversity starts from the field, with cotton growers developing more and more sustainable production techniques. And joining me today are two growers who signed up to the Cotton Trust Protocol. We have Sledge Taylor and Marshall Hardwick. Welcome to you both.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Thank you for having us.
Great to see you. Now, Sledge, you're in, I think, Como, Mississippi. Is that right?
That's correct.
So tell us a little bit more about your life there. I mean, you've been growing cotton for quite some time, I think.
I have. I think I've been farming for 47 years now. I was born here in Como and have lived pretty much my whole life here. It's a very small town, probably 1,500 people here, and kind of a rolling hill area that it's really a beautiful area in northern Mississippi, about an hour south of Memphis, Tennessee.
Oh, right. Memphis I have been to, but I've never been as far as you are. So, Marshall, and you're in Louisiana, is that right?
Yes, that's correct. Norton, Louisiana, which is in the northeast part of Louisiana, along the Mississippi River. Like Mr. Sledge, very small town of about 1,500 people. And it's very rural, and I'm a fourth generation cotton farmer, and I farm with my dad and older brother.
I love this, the whole family farming thing that we've come across this so much on this podcast. Still the families are there, which is a wonderful thing to hear. So, Sledge, we're talking about biodiversity today. What do you understand by biodiversity? What do you understand it to be, and how important is it to you?
Well, the biodiversity, to me, once upon a time, I think maybe the entire world had kind of a reductionist look at whatever you were doing, and you would reduce it down to the simplest things. But we find out that the more we know, that we don't know very much, but we do know that it's better to take a holistic approach within a community or a farm or whatever, because there are certain aspects of diversity that have benefits that we may not fully understand. So to me, biodiversity means that we are incorporating a lot of things within nature. We're not reducing them down to the basics. We're kind of incorporating them into a whole model. And where I live, we have farmland, we have pasture land or grazing land, and we have woods. And so we see quite a bit of diversity here just with the different ecosystems.
And over the years, have you seen a difference? Have you seen a change in the wildlife that's around and the way things are growing?
Well, once upon a time, there was a lot of agriculture in this area, and people farmed on a much smaller scale. And so, and times where, there was a depression and times were hard, and people actually ate a lot of the wildlife that was there. Well, now that people have moved to towns, there are not as many people on the farm. We've seen wildlife just abound. I mean, we have deer, we have turkey, we have bobcat. I mean, we have things that I never saw as a child. We have now. I mean, we have geese. We never used to see Canada geese this far south, and now we have them year round. So the wildlife is certainly abounded, even insects. And in the area I hear some areas don't have as many birds, but we have a lot of birds here as well.
So, Marshall, what about in Louisiana? Tell me how you understand biodiversity, what do you understand it to be, and how important is it to you?
Right. I agree 100% with Mr. Sledge. Biodiversity is basically doing as much as you can without just trying not to monocrop. And, it's the same thing as larger cities. You always hear about get a diverse industry, to recruit more businesses to come to a city or people. It's kind of the same idea. So you're doing practices that kind of create life within the soil. And a stale seed bed, with nothing growing, is not inviting to microorganisms, earthworms. It's not a very inviting soil type. So we're trying to do more and more cover crops. We're trying to, theoretically, we would like to have something growing on our farm 365 days of the year. It just creates a healthier soil. It creates life within the soil that is ultimately beneficial for our crops.
Marshall, are you actually planting cotton at the moment?
So right now today we are side dressing corn. We typically in the month of March plant corn, and then April we start planting soybeans, which we are doing today, and in May we plant cotton. That's roughly the timeline. And so we had our cover crop. We planted it in the fall of 2020, and that grew through the winter. And we sprayed a pesticide on it to kill the cover crop so we could plant into the ground. And so there's about a 3-week period there, 2-week period where nothing's growing on the ground, but we're pretty close behind that to start planting our crop. And the idea is, of course, to plant it from, say, corn or cotton in early spring and then harvest in the fall, where we'll in turn plant our cover crop again.
But you were saying how important it is that you always are keeping some sort of cover on the soil for soil conservation. And I presume that at different points of the growing cycle, you are doing all sorts of different things to preserve biodiversity.
Correct. So the cover crop does a number of things within the soil that is kind of hard for a farmer like myself just to see the benefits of it, but I know it's there. But the cover crop, at a minimum, after it dies, it'll lay over, and it actually protects, we call it a soil shield, and it'll actually lay over, and it protects the soil from just environments. I mean, it's like wearing a t-shirt versus not wearing a t-shirt. You have your t-shirt off, you get sunburned, you dry out, the wind's just kind of tearing at your skin. You put a shirt on and it protects you a little bit. And that's what the cover crop does essentially. We've seen in the heat of the summer, places where maybe there is no cover crop, temperatures will be in the 90s, and then you go pull away the cover crop in the field and check the soil temperature. It may be 10, 15 degrees cooler and lots of moisture. So those are the added benefits that really help get our crop through the year and use less resources to get it there.
And then do you notice then that there are more, for instance, wildflowers or pollinators around? I mean, do you actually see the difference if you're actually taking these steps?
Yes, absolutely. Sledge and I were talking before we were doing this recording how the black bears in this area have exploded. In Louisiana, they were put on the endangered species list by the federal government, and they were protected, still are protected, but they've got ample food, shelter, and water, and mainly just feeding on our corn that we grow. But their population has skyrocketed. They're now off the endangered species list. We've seen actual quails come back, coyotes, rabbits, and actually we're starting to have panthers in our area. So it's just great for the environment. And it's bringing back a lot of life. And
so, Sledge, what about you? What specifically do you do to try to conserve the soil quality and the general biodiversity? What steps do you take as a farmer?
Well, very similar to Marshall. I've been no-tilling our soil. I started no-tilling in the late 1980s, and just kind of gradually grew into more no-till, which means that we do not till the soil at all. We just leave the soil there. We plant right back through the residue that's on the soil. So in this past year, in 2020, we we normally prepare some of our soil every year, but in 2020, it rained so much during the year that we only had 90% of the soil we planted, or the crops we planted, were planted no-till, without any tillage. Some of that had cover crop on it. This year, we planted a cover crop in the fall of 2020 on 50% of our acreage. And just like Marshall, we try to leave a crop growing, something green and growing year round. Now, what that's doing is, as you well know, plants take carbon dioxide out of the air and they produce oxygen. And so all of that carbon dioxide coming out of the air makes organic matter, and organic matter is full of carbon. And that carbon falls on the soil and doesn't decompose. Now, it's going to eventually decompose, but it doesn't decompose as fast. So we're actually sequestering carbon and building the organic matter in our soils. And that's very beneficial because we see more rainfall infiltration into the soil, and partially that is due to earthworms. And earthworms like shade. They like that cover crop. They like the residue on the ground. And so, and plus that residue is food for the earthworms. So they come up and eat it, and they make these little tunnels, and the tunnels help the water to infiltrate, and the earthworms, there again, make the soil a little bit more loose. So that's kind of the general procedure.
So you're seeing much richer soil. Are you seeing much better crops as a result?
A lot. I cannot irrigate, but about 35% of my crops. So about 65% I do not irrigate, and so there's places that it's not practical to irrigate, and so I've had to do things to mitigate the fact that I don't have irrigation, and these cover crops and no tillage, building the soil, have actually done that for me, and my yields have actually increased where I've done this, just basically due to better soil health.
And what about the wildlife generally in terms, you talk about earthworms. Do you see pollinators around different sort of wildflowers? Do you see a change over the years that you've been doing this? Have you seen a change in the landscape?
Yes, I think so. The cover crops we grow, they begin to flower, and they have, they're going to try to produce seed too. And they flower, and so in the springtime there's pollen or whatever for insects, and then there are areas of the farm that we don't grow crops on, and we kind of leave that as a little biodiverse area, and we have natural plants that come up there like milkweed, thistle, and different things that are habitat for butterflies and different insects. And so, yeah, in general, I think. And here, agriculture has, we don't see as much agriculture in my area as we once did. And we've seen more land go back into trees, et cetera. So, but that's really doesn't have anything to do with what we're actually doing on the farm, but we are providing more areas for wildlife.
And of course, you're both members of the U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol. Do you think that actually that helps in the sense of giving you a forum through which to exchange ideas and to learn from each other? What do you think, Marshall? Do you talk a lot to other cotton growers and exchange thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. The program is set up to, you enter in your information, and as you know, it spits out kind of a spiderweb diagram, and it shows you how you compare to the national trend and regional trends. So at a very minimum, that just, right off the bat, you see, okay, well, I'm doing terrible with soil loss. What are my problems? The national average is this, and I'm way above it. What am I doing wrong? So you start taking steps to better those improvements, and you start visiting with farmers or people from the National Resource Conservation, NRCS, to just talk, what are my options? And there's several different routes to go, which the structures of drop pipes or culverts or grass waterways. There's a number of things, but the protocol is just an excellent way to see how you stand with your neighbors and with the country, and kind of get the thought process rolling in your head, in my opinion.
And what do you think, Sledge? I mean, do you find that your fellow cotton growers are all on board with this, and that you're trying new things?
Well, I certainly think there's a certain percentage that are on board with it, and it'll continue to grow. It's just like anything. You have maybe your earlier adopters or whatever, and I think we're probably beyond that. But the best way to approach farmers is from a peer-to-peer or farmer-to-farmer approach. The farmers are much more likely to take the advice of another farmer than they are someone else, and so that's what's going on. And I'll just give you one quick example. When I finished it, I looked at my spider diagram, and it showed that I was much higher than average in energy use on my farm, and I knew I wasn't. So I said, I've made a mistake somewhere. So I went back, and where did I ask for? This is a little technical, but where did I ask for how much calcium carbonate I had applied to the soil? I had clicked, and the math was wrong. I had clicked the wrong thing, and so it showed I was putting out much more than I was, and I went back and corrected that. So, so that was just an example of how I've compared myself to others, and that's it's just one more set of data for us to look at.
No, it's great. I mean, I think everybody says that the data that you're able to collect is so useful. The phrase regenerative agriculture is a bit of a kind of buzz phrase that's going around at the moment. Maybe you think it is just that, a buzz phrase. Maybe it's something you've been doing for quite some time. But I mean, what do you think, Sledge, about this as a concept, this sort of, I suppose, circular, holistic approach to agriculture?
Well, I've been a proponent of it for a long time, and you see it at work on my farm, and it's just, there's so many things that can happen. Just for example, I have more organic matter on the soil, which means more rainfall will infiltrate into my soil. And that means less runoff for someone downstream. It means more of the nutrients staying onto my farm and not going into a waterway. And we had over a 5-inch rain. I'm not sure how that compares to millimeters, but last week, and had massive flooding in my fields. And I went out and I took a picture of the weeds that were submerged and some of the cover crop that was submerged, and the water was crystal clear, and you could just see right down to the water was probably a foot deep, and you could see right down to the bottom. And it's just an example of some of the practices that are paying off.
It must be really satisfying, Marshall, when you're able to do this and really see those sort of results that Sledge was talking about. I mean, what about you in the phrase regenerative agriculture? Is it a phrase that you you use, or is that something that's just in the textbooks?
No, it is a relatively new phrase for me. But as Mr. Sledge said, the practices have been there for a long, long time. We are not quite as fortunate to be able to go no-till. What we call minimum tillage, where we do scratch up just the very top layer of the ground just to get enough loose dirt to make a big row. We're in the Mississippi Delta, so we're extremely flat, and getting rain runoff and water movement off the field. And the rows allow the plants to dry out quicker. So we have to do some kind of tillage, but we have seen our organic matter go from 1.2 to now over 4. We're just doing still minimum tillage. We're not doing a deep cut. We're not flipping the dirt. We're just scratching the top of it and keeping the structure of it, and then we make these beds. So the regenerative agriculture is kind of a new term for me, although the practices have been there forever. It's just defined a little different, I guess.
And what more do you think you can do as you go forward? I mean, do you have plans to do more?
We do. We're expanding our acres of cover crop every year. We're also trying to use technology. We rely very heavily on technology. We are using software program called MapShots, and we're taking yield data from multiple years, 5 to 7 years, and creating these high, medium, and low yielding maps on the field. And so we actually treat within the field differently from, say, 100 yards down the field. If it's a high producing, productive part of the field, we'll really put high levels of seed in there. It'll increase seed, increase the fertilizer. We're treating everything where it used to be a field by field basis. Now it's within the field, and it's creating great results for us. We're putting our products where they need to be. We're not wasting it. In these low yielding areas, what's the point of putting 30,000 plants when 20 will do just as well, and you're reducing your inputs and your resources, and you're not wasting it. So, technology is the driving force for us in trying to remain biodiversified in our farm.
And what about pesticides? Because obviously that's a really hot topic when we're talking about biodiversity. Are you able to use fewer pesticides, Marshall? I mean, how can you manage this issue? Because it is a hugely important one.
It is. So I've been farming full time for about 7 years, but I grew up on the farm. I've been on it all my life. When I was a teenager working, I wasn't spraying, but I can remember, my dad just putting out gallons and gallons of chemicals per acre. And today I did a spray map for our guy. We're talking about 1 ounce per acre. Or 32 ounces per acre at the high levels, not gallons per acre. And so you got to give chemical companies the credit. They've discovered ways to how they concentrate this component. So we're putting out ounces and not gallons, and it works. And we have to be able to protect our crops, especially in the South. It is a very tropical climate. Weed, diseases, insect pressure is very high. And so we spray when we need to, when the thresholds are there, but we don't overspray because, although you're putting out ounces to the acre, this stuff is still like $800 to $1,000 a gallon. So, it doesn't do us any good to overspray, and spray when we need to be effective.
And Sledge, what about you and this issue of pesticides? Are you able to reduce the amount that you use?
Oh yes, we've reduced the amount of pesticides we use enormously since I started, and of course we hire a consultant and we do something that's called integrated pest management, which means that there are economic thresholds of pests, and we may have pests out there, but they're not at economic damaging levels, and so we can tolerate those pests for a while. And we may never have to spray, or certainly if we do spray, we will have reduced the number of sprays. And, I kind of liken it. I mean, the entire, technology drives so much, and I kind of liken it almost to the computer industry or the internet. When we first started, it was pretty cumbersome. We wondered how this was ever going to work. And as technology goes along, we get better and better and better. I mean, sometimes we tend to look at the past, and especially when when the public is looking at a farmer, they may be looking at information that's 30 years old, and they kind of base their decisions on that. Well, we've progressed so far beyond what most people's concepts of a farmer are. And I mean, I envision a day that we may not even have to use pesticides. I don't know. I mean, it's not here today, but I envision a day that through technology, we may be able to do that.
Well, that's good to hear, certainly. What about the other end of the supply chain? If we're talking about biodiversity, do the fashion brands, the designers, are they talking about this themselves? I mean, Marshall, I read that you, a couple of years ago, had some fashion designers come visit. Is that right? And I mean, what do they talk about? What do they want to know about in terms of your approach to biodiversity?
Correct. Yes, that is correct. We're pretty excited. There's a cotton mill in Vidalia, Louisiana, which is about 40 miles south of here. It's one of the first mills to come back to the United States in a really long time, and they're going they've encouraged a lot of retailers, because it's people say that we're a highly scrutinized industry recently, and I just kind of disagree with that, because we've always been highly regulated, highly scrutinized by the government, EPA. And so these products that we are using today have gone through years, if not decades, of trials, research. And so we're extremely scrutinized from just a governmental regulation standpoint. So, it's important to me to be able to show the data, to say, hey, this is how my cotton was grown, because, it helps me source an end user for my cotton if that's what they want. And, so I'm excited about it. It's a new route to go that the industry has not really maybe fully understood how it will go, but it's an interesting take on it.
And kind of just to finish, really, what about the role of being a guardian or a steward of the countryside, of biodiversity, of nature? Is that as important almost as your growing of cotton? I mean, what would you say, Sledge? I mean, obviously you're making your money from the cotton, but you've also got to protect everything that's around you.
There's something just intrinsically, I think, innate within humans that we love to see things around us flourish. And for me, there are practices I do that cost me money. They're not economical necessarily, but I get a certain sense of satisfaction from doing them. You may do the same thing. You may grow tomatoes or flowers at your home. You could probably go to the store and buy them for less money, but there's something intrinsically satisfying about doing, having some living, growing thing that you have nurtured, and that's the way it is with me. There's just it's very satisfying to try to put all of this together, see how it works, and try to improve it. And that's what I enjoy. That's why I farm.
What about you, Marshall, being a steward and a protector of biodiversity?
I couldn't agree more with Mr. Sledge. It's a bouquet of just beautiful flowers when you just kind of step back and just look at it. As Mr. Sledge said, we do practices that cost us money. And one of those things is we usually leave about 50 feet of soybeans. We don't harvest them, and we leave those for wildlife to feed on through the winter, birds, deer. Obviously, that's just a straight loss for us, but it's important to us to have good life, whether it's the top of the food chain being humans or the bottom of the food chain being microorganisms in the soil. So as we all flourish, we all will do well, and it will continue. And as I said, I'm a fourth generation farmer. I don't have any children, but my brother does. So it's a very natural in the farming industry that, you see the next generation love to be outside, first of all, and then they may actually want to farm too. So you get to pass it on, and then they're just another stepping stone in the family tradition.
Well, thank you both very much. It sounds like your dog might need your attention there, Marshall.
Sorry.
Thank you very much for listening, and a lot of thoughts there on biodiversity and the regenerative agriculture techniques growers are using. So that's it for this edition of the US Cotton Trust Protocol's Smarter Conversations podcast. You can learn more about the Trust Protocol at trustuscotton.org. So I hope you can join us again next time. But for now, goodbye.